𝗪𝗡𝗡.
Are you familiar with Emanuel Swedenborg at all?
Yeah, I am actually. Very much so.
Okay, because I have a book on him. I mean, I know he's written, he wrote a lot, actually. Could you explain his case? Because I feel like he's one of these characters that maybe potentially as this movement of expansion and expanding consciousness goes on, he might get some love.
One of my jokes about Emanuel Swedenborg is every damn alley you go down, at the end of it's Emanuel Swedenborg. So he was a Swedish scientist. He, if my memory's right, he was basically head of the Swedish government that oversaw engineering and mining and things like that. And pretty late in life, he suddenly began to have visions. He probably had some kind of stroke or something. We don't really know. But he like overnight became this savant, this sort of spiritual savant. And he wrote many, many books on the afterlife and on these abilities. And he was also, by the way, a spy.
What?
Yeah.
For
Sweden.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this is another, this is really interesting. He was also, the other thing about Swedenborg that was so fascinating, he was also very significant to a man named Emanuel Kant, who wrote a book early on in his career. He wrote it anonymously and basically made fun of Swedenborg. But it's clear to Kant that he actually believed that Swedenborg was the real deal and that he had these sort of clairvoyant or telepathic experiences. And nobody could explain them, of course, at the time, but people recognized that this was the real deal. And then Swedenborg then becomes really important to American religious history, particularly in the 19th century with the rise of spiritualism, which was essentially contacting the dead. And so all of these, mostly women who in the middle of the century become mediums, are really harking back to Swedenborg, by the way, although not always consciously.
What about another rabbit hole, let's say, that I haven't gone down yet that I have on my list? Madame Blavatsky.
Well, that was the other person who's at the end of every damn
okay, for sure.
It's either Swedenborg or Blavatsky.
True.
Only go down that rabbit hole if you're really willing to do a lot of work and do a lot of reading. So Blavatsky was a Russian woman of aristocratic descent who ended up in the U.S. founding something called the Theosophical Society in 1875, which is extremely influential. It's really hard to emphasize how influential this was. And really what Theosophy came to be known for in the late 1800s and the early 1900s was a kind of comparative religion and a kind of emphasis on what they called the latent powers in man. And of course, they were using gendered language at that time. But they really meant it. Theosophy was really the mechanism through which the fascination with Egypt partially entered Europe and America, and certainly India in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So they were very, and Theosophy was very influential on Indian politics, by the way, and Indian independence and early Indian nationalism. So just had a tremendous influence. And some of the, like Annie Besant, some of the people who took over Theosophy after Blavatsky died were very politically involved around gender and sexuality and independence, kind of an anti-colonial independence. Theosophy is hugely influential on what we think of as the New Age movement and on the counterculture, and even on the UFO culture. There's a whole theosophical wing of UFO culture that's obviously theosophical. And so any talk you get of hidden masters or occult powers, or this is largely or auras or the astral plane, or I mean I could go on and on. That is largely indebted to Theosophy, not entirely.
Yeah, I'm just realizing what a amazing opportunity I have now to ask a religious scholar all of my crazy questions, and they're pouring out of my head. So, Padre Pio.
Yeah.
What do we make of this story? Can you tell us?
You just jump from Emanuel Swedenborg to Adam Blavatsky to Padre Pio. Oh my God.
I want to give people a background and all of the great names that they should go check out.
Um, Padre Pio. Okay, so Italian priest, very, very Roman Catholic, and probably the most famous modern stigmatic. To use the Catholic language, a stigmatic is someone who has the wounds of Christ. Usually, by the way, wounds in the palm, it's almost certainly that Jesus was not crucified in the palms, by the way.
Huh.
Almost certainly crucified in the wrists, because the palm will just rip.
I see.
But in medieval art, the crucifixion was always through the palm. So the stigmata is interesting because it's likely some kind of response to Christian art on some kind of unconscious level. And usually the first stigmatic is identified as St. Francis of Assisi. The guy in your garden with the birds, that was one intense dude. And you know, when I went to Assisi, you could like see his bloody socks, Will. I mean, they were still caked with blood. So he had wounds in his feet and in his hands and probably on his side. And Padre Pio is in some ways the kind of the successor, the sort of modern successor of this. And there was a lot of miraculous events around Padre Pio. He died, what, a couple decades ago? I don't know what his dates are. You can look him up, but a lot of bilocation, by which we mean appearing in two places at once, a lot of cures, a lot of things. There were a lot of charges of fraud and hoaxing as well, as there always is in these cases. But Padre Pio is a big deal in modern Roman Catholicism.